Why do demographic data show distinct urban versus rural socioeconomic indicators? Imagine walking through a bustling city street and then visiting a quiet countryside. The differences you see reflected more than just scenery. They tell a story about how people live, work, and grow up in different parts of the country. When we look at demographic data, we see clear patterns that separate urban from rural areas. These patterns come from how economies are built, where people move, and what resources are available. In rural areas, poverty rates tend to be higher than in cities. For example, in 2019, rural poverty was 15.4%, while in urban areas it was 11.9%. This gap is even bigger for certain groups. Rural Black or African American residents faced poverty at 30.7% compared to 20% in cities. Rural American Indians or Alaska Natives had nearly 30% poverty rates, while urban rates were just under 20%. Hispanic residents in rural areas also experienced more poverty than their city counterparts. Income levels follow a similar pattern. Rural households often earn less than $50,000 a year, with nearly 40% falling into this category. In cities and suburbs, fewer households earn that little. Higher-income households tend to cluster in urban and suburban areas, especially near large metropolitan centers. When we look at where poor people live, about half of all poor Americans are in suburbs and small metro counties. A third live in cities, and around 17% in rural areas. But rural counties face more severe poverty, with nearly a third experiencing what is called concentrated poverty, where at least 1/5 of the population lives below the poverty line. Employment is another area where differences show up. Rural residents often participate less in the labor force. More rural workers are unemployed or not actively seeking work. For prime working-age adults, especially men aged 25 to 54, employment rates are about 15 percentage points lower in rural counties than in cities. Earnings per worker also tend to be higher in urban areas. After the recession from 2007 to 2009, all areas saw earnings drop, but rural areas experienced the smallest percentage decline. Education levels tell a story too. Over the past 21 years, urban areas have gained more college-educated residents. The gap between city and rural areas has widened. Fewer rural residents have a bachelor's degree or higher than in cities. This is because higher-skilled jobs are mainly found in urban centers, where the returns on education are better. Population movement also shapes these differences. Many rural counties have changed over time. Nearly half of counties that were rural in 1970 became urban by 2018. These counties tend to have younger, wealthier, and more educated residents. Meanwhile, rural counties that stayed rural have become older, poorer, and less educated. Younger people and those with more education tend to move to cities for better opportunities. This migration pattern is especially strong in the South and West regions. Health outcomes also differ. Rural residents, especially in high-poverty counties, face higher death rates. They have higher rates of the leading causes of death, including heart disease and infant mortality. They also experience higher COVID-19 death rates compared to urban residents. All these differences are driven by structural factors. Rural economies are less diverse and have fewer high-paying jobs. Cities attract more skilled workers, which creates a cycle of growth. Rural areas often serve as service providers for nearby cities, with many residents commuting to urban centers for work. The aging population in rural areas results from young people leaving for better opportunities. As a result, rural communities tend to have smaller working populations and fewer resources for local services. In summary, demographic data show that urban and rural areas operate with different economic structures, employment opportunities, and population trends. These factors create the distinct socioeconomic indicators we see across the country.